Let's get around to our guest of the evening. Here's the bio for Ashley Willcott. She's a highly sought-after legal analyst and certified child welfare law specialist who has served as a former judge and trial attorney with many years of courtroom experience. Willcott currently serves as executive director of the Office of the Child Advocate for the Protection of Children and was hand-chosen by the governor of Georgia, Nathan Deal. Willcott is regularly featured as an expert on top-tier national outlets such as Nancy Grace and is highly sought-after guest lecturer and speaker nationally and locally, including the American Bar Association, National Association of Counsel for Children, Georgia Supreme Court Committee on Justice for Children, Emory University Law School, Barton Child Law and Political Center, Georgia State University, on and on and on. You get the picture. Very, very, very well established. Okay, so let me give Ashley a call.
I'm so sorry. My Skype is not receiving.
Hey, Ashley, how are you? It's Frank.
I'm good. All my apologies.
No, it's not your fault. We've been having problems with Skype ourselves over here this week. We had another little bit of a mishap on Tuesday with our guest then, but at least that we were on to actually diagnose the problem together. So happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you, I use Skype frequently, and for some reason this is an unusual issue. So I thank you for your patience.
Well, in either case, Ashley, I just did all your bios. We're talking about all of your great work. And I have to say, I've definitely caught you on television before. And as I prepped for tonight's show, I really did become a big admirer of your work. And more so than any other reason that I am extremely distrustful of the whole "I'm from the government and I'm here to help" mantra. But you as an individual advocate of education and child services, you really take a balanced stances on the issues that you weigh in on. And so I thank you for being with us tonight, for sure.
Well, thank you, Frank. I really appreciate the opportunity because anything we can do to help get the word out and educate about, hopefully, that balanced approach, that would be my goal.
Well, what's the majority of the work that you dedicate yourself to today, whether it be in your private practice or anything else? We went through a lengthy list of all your associations and your appointments, and it seems like you are just, are you working on like 28-hour days?
I will tell you, I am a workhorse. But that aside, my current job is Office of the Child Advocate. That is an oversight agency in the state of Georgia that oversees the Department of Family and Children's Services, trains attorney guardian ad litem, and has some other responsibilities. But I do legal analyst work. I've been in private practice for 20 years doing child welfare law. I was appointed by Governor Deal 2.5 years ago. Never say never, right? I said never will I work for the government or take a position of that sort. And I was very honored to be approached and very honored and humbled to actually work for this governor and do this work.
And you believe very, very strongly about the parents' right to have to be able to direct their kids' education, including the right to choose, which is something that we're very big on with this show. And as an alternative to public education and all that in private, and be able to choose charter schools, whatever, for any kind of religious reasons too. But from your perspective, would you say that the current role of government in education hinders or helps parents to exercise those rights to choose?
I will say I think it is dependent on the particular location and where you live, the state and the actual county in which you live. Generally, the system is designed to give parents that choice, right? So at one point in time, homeschool, for instance, may not have been something that was appealing to the government, or there may have been argument governmental interests outweigh and you shouldn't be allowed to homeschool. We've come a long way, right? So parents have a choice to do homeschool. They have the choice for other education opportunities. I think that theoretically it is absolutely designed to give parents choices and the education for their children. I think in practice, often there's some overreaching, and that may not happen as well as it should.
Yeah, that's a lot of the we cover a lot of those overreaching, and not only just overreach, but we cover a lot of issues that just point to general waste. I mean, especially when we look at school districts like in some really bad areas in Detroit, where we just see, in a sense, state and federal funds that just you might as well just throw the money into a furnace. Because not only is it going to schools that are just failed, there's a lot of corruption that's involved too. We've been hearing about, reading and covering stories of people just cashing checks for fake after-school programs that they set up and stuff like that. So, are you part of the system that actually monitors situations like that, or do you advocate for something entirely different?
No, that is part of the role of the Office of the Child Advocate. So we investigate any case that comes to our attention that has Department of Family and Children's Services history that necessarily puts us into the system such as education. And so when we investigate or learn that any of those things are happening, or a school is not providing the services and education to a child it should, and we investigate, then we can look into those particular issues. And I have to say, thank goodness, I love your show, Frank, and thank goodness that you raised this issue, because we have to increase the public's willingness to speak out when they see a school that's failing, or they don't know why is it failing. When you have all these resources and money's coming in, what is going on, so that it can be investigated. Because when there is abuse of power and abuse of funding, that's got to be stopped for that particular school, and then also as a system.
Now, in your personal opinion, let's just stay with let's just hypothetically, there's nothing is really tied to this, but hypothetically, let's just use the city of Detroit. Let's say there is a really bad school system there, or a really bad school in particular. Are you of the mindset that competition and choice and allowing a school like a public school that is in particular bad shape to fail is a healthier way of bringing up all of the choices and all the opportunities for kids? I feel like people are so averse to letting a school fail that they'd rather throw more money at a problem that has no chance of coming back to life than for allowing people to maybe take home vouchers or something like that and look elsewhere for better educational opportunities.
I do agree with you that in general, I see that nobody wants to let a school fail, right? That they're going to put more resources and money into it to try to get it to be successful and succeed. I personally believe that options are better. Okay. The more options a parent has, we have the right, the constitutional right, to parent our children. We have to educate our children. So why should we not have the right to make the choices we want to make for our particular children? I personally think that that's a good route to go. But you're right, a lot of school systems, government agencies, individuals do not want to allow schools to fail, and that's the rub.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I'm a big school choice guy, 100%. And another reason why I really admire your work, I really do. But you brought something up there that would be a good segue into another issue, which is just parenting in general and education. Now, I have quotes here, and I have things just stored away in my head from people like Melissa Harris Perry and other pro-Common Core advocates out there and stuff like that, who will go out of their way to use phrases like, when it comes to parenting in general, that kids belong to communities and that educators are engaged in the act of, quote, co-parenting. Now, I am really I've had great teachers in my life. They have been amazing influencers on me. They have taught me a really healthy way of thinking about things, not how to think, not what to feel, but just how to analyze what's in front of me and enjoy the finer things in life, art, literature, all that stuff. But I never at any point in my life ever felt like I was being parented, or that the authority and that the influence of my family at home was being overridden by people at school. Do you think there is any danger in this new way of thinking that children belong to communities and they're pretty much wards of the state?
I do and I don't. So here's how I do. It is very true that society now tends to take the approach of community raises a child. It takes a village as a common statement that you hear. It takes a village to raise a child. I do not believe that to be true in this sense. It takes a parent. It takes a caregiver. It should start in the home, It should end in the home. That's the person responsible for raising the child and ensuring they get the education that they need and that they are to get. What I think the problem is with It Takes a Community is then there tends to sometimes be a hands-off by parents or a belief by a society or community that the school's supposed to be doing that, the teachers are supposed to be doing that. That's not my responsibility. It is a parent's responsibility. You've got to make sure they get to school, that they're doing their homework, that they're going to school every day, that the teachers are teaching them, that they're receiving an education. A parent is ultimately the one responsible person, not the community. Now, where the community does play a role and make a difference is if a child's identified at school as, they can't keep up with the classes because they may have some needs that we need to identify and tell the parents, hey, they may have these special learning needs. Or if a child is coming to school and is black and blue, there's certainly a responsibility as a mandated reporter, but also as a community to report that accordingly. So while there's certainly an appropriate role for the community, I do not believe that it's the community's job to co-parent a child. That is a parent or caretaker's job.
Once again, it's very refreshing to hear it come out so succinctly and so stern. So that's fantastic too. Now, you also said right there, when you see bruises on a kid, when you see black and blues, when there's something that's very visual, I know that you have laid commentary down and you're involved in very many cases where you're actually analyzing footage of doctors that are abusing kids, of babysitters that will shake infants, that, things that are undeniable. The one thing that I have always felt is getting a little bit more draconian, a little bit more scary and Orwellian, is the arbitrary nature, it seems, at least to the untrained eye at first, that organizations like, CPS operate under, especially when there's all of this, there's ways of leaving anonymous tips and false accusations. Can we talk about false accusations and ways to combat that with CPS for a second?
Sure, and tell me more specifically, maybe I missed how you mean. So anybody can report to CPS, right?
Right.
Anybody who's a mandated reporter, like a doctor or a school teacher, should report. And in terms of false reports, maybe I just need clarity around what you want in that regard, because I have a lot to say, but it may not be responsive.
Okay, well, so let me put it this way. What I've gathered is that there are options to fight back against false accusations. But the problem is that most people can't actually prove that the other person who they think made the accusation has actually made the report when it's anonymous. So I personally get very wary about the ability to force government inquiry or action through anonymous tips. What perspective has your experience given you on that subject in particular?
Yeah, now I absolutely understand what you're asking. So, A, I would say regardless, anybody who suspects it and has any evidence of it should report it. B, it's true, it can always be anonymous. C, if you're a parent and there's a false accusation, it is horrific to get involved with a state system, right, that is there to protect your children if there are false accusations. But I would say if they're false and there's no evidence, you're going to win. You may have to go through some steps and interviews. You may even have to get an attorney. But if it's a false accusation, regardless of knowing where it came from or not, in the end, the evidence is going to be clear that it's false accusation. I will tell you what my office sees all too frequently, and that is in custody matters, divorce cases, parents making accusations against the other parent, right? Mm-hmm. And the good thing is, I'm going to tell you, in the state of Georgia as a system, I see a real trend of by the Department of Family and Children's Services being diligent in their reporting methods, documenting methods. They frequently are able to very quickly see the trends, the patterns, interview the children at school, find that there are no marks, for instance, if it was, there was an accusation of physical abuse. And they're very quick to see patterns of when it is a custody matter, false allegations, versus a true report of child abuse that there needs to be further action on. So I would just feel like, especially in custody matters as a system, our system does end up in a position able to recognize those. But it is a scary thing as a parent to have those accusations made against you, especially if they're false.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and there's other situations too that you cover a lot of, and one of the notes that I have here to potentially ask you about was an example of the fundamental right to parent versus government interest when parents who believe in certain types of let's say medical intervention. Not too long ago, I believe it was last year, for 16 months or something like that, we were exposed to that story about Justina Pelletier. Are you familiar with that whole situation up in Connecticut?
Remind me a fact or two. I see so many cases, I can't remember the name.
Justina Pelletier, she was being held, let me see here. I think this was up in Connecticut, but it had to do with a Boston Children's University hospital that was holding her against, taking her away from the parents and keeping her in government custody because she was at first being treated for a mitochondrial syndrome or something like that. And when the parents brought her to another hospital, they had made another diagnosis, and when the parents didn't want her to be treated for something that the new doctors believe was psychological, and they wanted to bring it back to the old doctor, that's when the hospital pretty much claimed custody over the kid, and I believe kept her in custody for about 16 months or so. In either case, we don't have to go on that because obviously neither do I. I don't even have my facts straight. Obviously, I was just trying to bring up a recent incident that I remembered, but. What kind of instances do you have in your memory of being there for government versus parents on medical issues, whether it be some kind of a religious stand or just anything in general? Or chemo. Right. What about chemo in particular? Chemotherapy. A lot of people believe in alternative methods to treating cancer, or at least the choice to not go through the struggle and the pain that could be chemo and radiation-based therapy. You believe that it is the right of the government to intervene on behalf of the child if the parents don't want to go through chemotherapy?
Boy, that is such a great hypothetical because that one's just not as clear cut. But I'm going to tell you legally I think it is, and here's what I mean. So if a parent chooses to use an alternative method to chemo, that's their parental right in treating the child. When it gets tricky is whether or not a doctor can or does say, listen, if you don't treat them with chemo, with this one treatment, chemo, this child is definitely going to die, versus if you treat the child with chemo, then this child has a 90% chance of beating the cancer and it being in remission, right? Let's say that's the theoretical. If a parent, the state could ask a court and say, look, this doctor's saying that without chemo, this child is going to die no matter what, and with chemo, they have a good chance of beating it and it going into remission. That's a good argument where the government interest a compelling interest to save the child's life is going to outweigh the parent's interest in finding alternative means. But the reality is with something like cancer and chemo, we all know that there are different philosophies, there are different choices, there are alternatives. And the reality is the doctor can't say, well, without chemo, they're going to die tomorrow. And if you have chemo, they're going to go in remission. Right. That's not possible with a disease like cancer. So generally, a parental right is you get to make the choice, right, for your own child as to what type of treatment they are going to receive. And unless a state can prove, hey, without it, they're no matter what going to die quickly, then there's an argument that the government cannot step in. That's a parental choice. Now, a more clear cut, and so chemo's just I just love your show because that's such a great example of where it's a hard balance, but you can still make a pretty clear line, and the judge ultimately has to make that decision. Another example is blood transfusions, which for religious reasons some do not, will not, cannot for religious reasons agree to. In that circumstance, generally a doctor can say if this child does not get a blood transfusion, they are going to die within the week. Or if they do, they have a chance of being completely healthy and we won't have any more problems. And because often it's a blood disorder, for instance. And so when that happens, because it can be very clear-cut, this is a life-saving measure. That's what it has to be. It has to be a life-saving measure. Then a court is likely to order and say, respect the religious freedom. However, because this child's going to die without it, we have a compelling government interest. A very long answer to your short question.
No, you know what, Ashley, I'm really, really happy that every once in a while we get to speak to people like you who work inside of this system that we have a lot of disdain and a lot of distrust for, and you actually really do try to strike a responsible balance with all this stuff. Because I'll tell you, there's nothing but scariness when it comes to looking at what our system on all levels really has become in a constitutional sense. We're very big fans of the Constitution. We study it as much as we can, and knowing what was framed for us by that Constitution and what we're actually living under right now, it is pretty scary and pretty staggering at times how much influence government and, far off, in many cases, unelected bureaucrats have over our lives. And to know that we have warriors like you in the trenches trying to strike that balance and speak for people is really, really awesome. And I want to thank you once again for coming on the show tonight.
I really appreciate that. Let me just end with people do need to advocate for themselves and get educated, because without getting educated about what the government has a right to do, there are a lot of situations the government's going to try to overstep, which you know. And I appreciate your show for that reason.
And thank you. So is there anything else, any kind of cause, anything in particular that you want people to check out, a URL, a book, anything that you want to draw people's attention to before we get off?
No, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. I know time can be limited. I really encourage anyone who hears this, if they have any questions about what their rights are as a parent, what the government can or cannot do under the laws, please reach out to me. I have a website. It's Ashley Willcott, ASHLEYWILLCOTT.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, because my goal is to educate people. So if I can help educate about where to go for answers or how to ensure that their rights are protected, I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And we're going to get this highlight up on YouTube real quick. We'll send it out to you so you can use it for whatever media purposes you'd like. And I'd love to have you back on the show one day.
Thank you. I would love it. Thank you for your show and all you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.